Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, it's been a while, and so I really need to get on with it and make this video, which is the "What Were You Thinking?" video about running my first adventure of Circle of Hands. And I'm doing this because I've already just rolled the preparation for the next one, so I better get on with this. And this is something that we haven't done so far in our group in terms of doing recaps and reflections videos, but Anthony did this for his ventures, and it actually is pretty cool, and I find it kind of compelling for this particular game. Talking about how did what were you thinking when you ran the NPCs, especially considering how venture preparation goes. So I figured I'd talk about this a little bit. It was interesting that, to begin with, I started out the venture with Arrival. The first venture that we had, Anthony had us arriving at the place. Second venture, he had us open it up with us actually having been there for a little while. There's some information in this book that will let you know that you are supposed to kind of narrate how Arrival happens, the trip there and what have you, and that actual scene-based play doesn't happen until you actually get to the place. In other places in the book, it kind of indicates that the reaction rolls or the charm rolls that you have with the named characters that have to get introduced in the first few scenes, these things tend to happen after you've been there for a little while. And why? Because this gives you your full 2 dice when you make a roll. Otherwise, you're making a versus 12 roll. You need to get 12 or better with just 1 die. And unless you have a charm of at least 6, you have no chance of succeeding on a charm roll with a named character. You simply can't roll 7 or higher on 1d6. So that's how it goes. So this particular time, I wanted to have some kind of arrival to the place. There was enough things going on that I really wanted to narrate all of that. And so I decided, well, let me just have them arrive there. It's been really cool to have Ron Edwards give us feedback on the game and on how we're playing. And also we got some great comments from Gethin Edwards, who was also a playtester in this game. Really, really cool. Talking about things just like that. So next venture, I will definitely start it out with the characters having been there for a while, but that's what I was thinking. I decided I wanted to have them arrive there. There were enough elements in this 3-component venture that I really wanted to describe their arrival into town, as it were. And I couldn't really wrap my head around the idea that they would have been there for any real length of time without having taken a look at this object that they were there to see. And without kind of, especially seeing as Kai was a gentry, how much time would it really take before he noticed that something was very, very wrong in terms of the gentry there, in terms of Friedman, and in terms of this black witch, this Feist Verjarn, living there. Wouldn't take very much time at all. So I decided to just have them show up at the place, and we started pretty much upon arrival. So that's what I was thinking with that. It's interesting, like, what Eloy said about the fact that, Black Hadrick kind of feels like comic relief, and that's certainly not my intent, and he never felt like comic relief to me. I think that's kind of been our experience with poor Black Hadrick, because he's so friendly. The way he introduces himself to people is, he's a heretic priest. He's a wizard. People don't trust wizards to begin with. It's really tough for him to integrate into society. He's a character I find very compelling, somebody I would really like to play, and so I don't think of him as comic relief at all. It just so happened that the other characters that we brought to ventures have had the opportunity to earn their full 2 dice, or have been charming enough, or have been in the right place at the right time, with the exception of Ingolf, who has a terrible charm. And, nobody liked Ingolf. And so you'll see what happens when somebody else plays Ingolf, how that goes for them. But, of course, Black Hadrick finds himself in these situations where he just hasn't had the opportunity to really get himself situated in the community. And thus, very often, people don't react to him very well. And so, out of character, we end up laughing. I never think of Black Hadrick as being this comic relief in-game. It's just very tough for him to actually integrate into society. And any wizard, it's going to be tough for them. And for him, he just has a lot of strikes going against him, which makes him a very compelling character to me. Anyhow, that's enough about that. So I had these 3 components. I had a lot of characters, named characters in the venture, with things going on. And The one thing I regret is that I didn't have enough time prior to the game to go back and really review who these characters were and kind of differentiate them a little bit more in my mind and really crystallize, what they wanted and all these sort of things. So I'd kind of come up with it in the past and then kind of put it down for a little while. So I wrote down a bunch of little cheat sheets and notes on these 3x5 cards, which I consulted a bit. But there were some times when I was actually, playing them. And I, wasn't lost, but for a second I had to remember, okay, what would they really want? And so I felt like I didn't do them enough justice sometimes as individuals, but I did as as good as I can, late at night and with having had a long day. So it is what it is. But I'm not unsatisfied with how the session went. But I thought to myself, yeah, here's something I would like to spend a little bit more time with these characters. In fact, today we played another game. It was very impromptu, and they said, one of the things was, hey, can we play Circle of Hands again? I really hadn't rolled the dice for the venture, and for this game, I feel that you really need to do some due diligence to the preparation, especially with really crystallizing who these named characters actually are. So I said, no, I can't do that. So we played another very fun game. So don't feel bad about that. Anyhow. This video doesn't exactly have anything to do with that. So let's go back to how I handle these characters. There's so much going on with these named characters, and there's so much preparation that went into who they were as people and what they wanted. And I don't mean hours and hours, but just I prepared who they were. It was interesting that in a setup like this, where it is essentially a one-shot, it is a venture, we're going to play this thing from beginning to end, you have to, and I had to, become comfortable with the idea that all the stuff that I prepared, all the things about them, may never get revealed. The intricacies of what they want, all the sort of soap opera stuff that's going on in the game, I don't need to force that and vomit that all over the players as soon as they show up. So I played the characters as would happen naturally. What really happens when you really meet this guy? What really happens when you meet this guy, Dietmar, the merchant artisan, and his racker, Gort? You just kind of see Gort. You see this guy that looks kind of angry and is under a lot of pressure. Black Hadrick tried to interact with him. He really didn't care for Black Hadrick based upon a charm roll. He didn't really see the Circle Knights as giving him anything useful. They all know that you're coming. That's part of the conceit of the book. They knew the Circle Knights were coming. They're not really sure why. They're an outside influence from Rolke. They have their other things going on in this village. And based upon the charm roll, he just didn't really trust them very much. And this charm roll, it really, the way I read it, it lets you know whether the named character, the non-player character, sees the Circle Knight as a resource or an obstacle. It's not just if they like them or not. That can be part of it. But it's, geez, does this person look like they could be useful to my cause, to what I want, or do they look like somebody that's a threat? And so, to him, the Circle Knights kind of looked like a threat. At least Black Hadrick did. Kai Ernst just kind of rode on by, so I just kind of waved him off. The named or like the characters of the components, the named characters in the components were aware of each other. They had opinions about each other, but they didn't have that real connection with each other. But he was able to say, "Oh yeah, the priest is over there. That's what you're looking for. Go ahead, go see the priest." So that was the entire interaction they ever had with Dietmar, the merchant artisan, and Gort. It was, I don't want to say sad, but I really liked Gort. I hoped, it was one of those things I said, gosh, that would be a really fun thing for them to interact with, but that's not what happened. So that's all we saw of them. So that's, what I was thinking when I played that fellow. As far as Reagan the priest, well, the charm roll went really well. Black Haddock really kind of found a place that he could be useful. And this priest, they had a good charm roll, so that instantly he sees Black Hadrick as a resource. He sees him as somebody that could perhaps help him. So that guided how I had him interact with Black Hadrick at that point. He had a really interesting thing going on in terms of his motivations, where he really wanted help deciphering this big, giant Panetheri disc. He could only get so far with it. But he didn't want the knowledge or the item removed from the community. He really felt this real sense of, this is part of our community, this is part of our heritage. The item needs to stay here, and really the knowledge kind of needs to stay here. And so as Black Hadrick is talking about the fact that they've heard of this, he's a little taken aback. This is not really feeling good to him. I didn't want to telegraph too much. said he looks a little bit uncomfortable, what have you. Eloy did not ask for a wits roll. He could have, in which case I would have given him some more information in terms of what are you really seeing about, this guy in terms of, what he's thinking. But I didn't feel like I should just offer that up and say, hey, do you want to make a wits roll? Because the game kind of says, well, wits rolls are really called for by players. And so, there were some times during the game that I thought afterwards, I should have called for some dice rolls or suggested some dice rolls, but I'll get to that point. Because this is really one where, Eloy just really didn't call for it, so I didn't really offer that up. But I, was playing Reagan in terms of the idea that, he's kind of conflicted at this point. I see this Circle Knight, I see this Black Hadric as somebody that's a resource. He's a priest too. This whole gray magic thing is kind of interesting. I don't really trust magic at all, but this is something new. This is something different. But this is somebody that maybe has resources, maybe has other smart people with him that can help us, because we can only get so far, and I'm not really sure who I can trust. And so he was very, very conflicted, but hopeful, but also a little scared, because the idea, this knowledge of the artifact's existence was not only outside the community, but had attracted some kind of interest that already had him feeling a little bit threatened. So that's why I played him the way I did. At that point, we don't get to see and interact with Reagan the Priest ever again, because that's not what happened in the venture. But that's what I was thinking portraying him. So here are two really big things, two of the named components, two of the named characters. Gort's not really a named character, but I put the statistics down and I thought a little bit about who Gort was. But that's the only time I really got to portray them, which is okay, because, you plan, you prep, but you don't plot. You don't know what's going to actually happen. But that's what I was thinking with those particular named characters, those components, those interactions with those people. And once again, the idea is I didn't want to vomit forth all of this information. I could have, but to what end? In that case, I'm pretty much telling the players, well, you need to go concentrate on this. And it wouldn't have felt very natural. In fact, we were talking today in our group about things that feel natural and things that don't feel so natural. So it felt very natural to do that. That's what happened. I'm happy with the way that came out. So let's talk about what they did find more interesting. Friedman, the gentry, who had kind of made a bargain with the devil, for lack of a better term, he was in a bit of a bind. Friedman and Feist were the two named characters involved in our third component, which was Urbaja interference. Feist herself was one of the pieces of that component because she is a wizard. She is a wizard of Urbaja. The other piece of that Urbaja interference is the eye itself, that demon. And so Friedman has found himself in this real jam. He has this woman who has shown up. Her motivation pretty much is she wants safety from other wizards in Spur and from liches in Spur. Spur is a place where Urbaja has a hold, but liches especially don't really like black wizards because they can use the black speech on them. She has some kind of connection with a lich because that's one of the gifts that I've rolled up for her. So I figured, well, she's got some kind of connection to this merchant house that they're dealing with. This is the leader of that merchant house that's kind of trading, supplies from Spur for their grain and their beer from our village here. But she just wants to live the high life. You can play an Urbaja wizard in a bunch of different ways. So she was just a woman of excess. And so what she was really concerned with mostly was her safety and with the ability to live this life, this hedonistic lifestyle, if you will. And Friedman, on the other hand, he wants the village to be safe. And he believes safety is through things like trade as opposed to just armament. The idea that Spur can roll right over them if they really want to, but they can only get our resources once. But if we trade with them, then we can, and we're going to have to trade with them at a disadvantage to us, but we stay safe. They get things all the time. We get some resources back. That's what he felt is the right thing to do. But he was willing to sell his soul, so to speak, make a deal with this eye, make a deal with this Feist to, summon a demon for him to pretty much get what he wanted, to lead the community in a way that he felt it should be led. So I had to play him in that manner, and he was also somebody that had a lot of charm. And so the opening scene, who was he actually talking to? He was talking to not named characters, but other members of the professional group, not Dietmar, the beer merchant, because they can't be that connected. And also, he's down with trading with Spur, all the other people. So he's having problems already. And that's kind of what I was introducing. But once again, I'm not going to vomit all that all over Kai Ernst, all over or Anthony, unless he asks for a wits roll. What can I find out what's going on? Which didn't get asked for, which is fine. So he has an interaction with Kai Ernst. Our woman Feist makes her first appearance because they need to make their appearances early on. And, Feist, the charm rolls go well with both of them. They both see Kai Ernst as a bit of a resource at this point. He's earned full 2 dice. For Friedman, because he's a gentry. For Feist, I was on the fence. There's still a case I could have said, maybe he's just going to roll 1 die for the charm roll because he's a heretic being a member of the circle. And I'm still not sure, did I make the right call or not? I just made the call. Let's just go ahead and roll 2 dice. And so the charm roll worked. She sees him once again as a resource. I felt that she was at that point just intrigued by Kai Ernst. Still wary of the circle, but I just pictured her once again as this woman with these insatiable desires for everything. So she sees him almost as a thing that maybe it's a conquest or a potential conquest. And that's kind of how I left it there. But it was a very brief interaction. And then, Anthony picked up the ball and went with it. And, went to the burial mound. And, we had to look through all the spells and figure out, well, how can you actually go ahead and summon the spirit of this dead guy? Because there's no real spell to go do that. So we looked kind of liberally at the spells. And, with a combination of 3 spells taking 5 hours to cast this ritual, I figured, well, that's pretty cool. I could have, called for a bigger cross and said that, hey, Blackadder kind of feels some disturbance with this. We were still kind of going back and checking some of the rules here and there, and you kind of have to say that you were trying to activate your wizard sense and see if anything was going on. And I just, kind of retroactively, when we were talking about it, said, okay, well, you noticed something happened. But I could have actually had, cut back to another scene during that 5-hour scene itself. When Kai Ernst is summoning this fellow and what have you. But we were just kind of rolling with it. So I wasn't thinking too much about that at the time. And so that was a fun little interaction as well. And then, at this point, there is that kind of meeting of the 2 men again. They're in the dining hall, and then things go very, very fast in terms of actual actions. We kind of looked in the rules at that moment when Anthony declared that Kai was going to flip up the man's eye patch and then later on try to, poke his eye out and use some kind of spell to get rid of it. And so there was a lot of time was spent, out of game, out of character, looking up what spell would actually work for this and all that sort of stuff. The actual actions themselves were pretty fast. I made the call at the time, don't roll dice. I think if I was able to go back now, I probably would have had them at least make quickness versus 12 rolls. I'm not really sure if I really would have had them get pulled into a clash right away and invoke the full combat rules. I think I'm still just figuring out the spirit of this game, so to speak. And, if you watch this channel long enough, you know that I'm a person that will look at a game for the spirit of it, but I didn't want to make calls based on how I normally would run a game, and I'm not talking about house ruling or making something up, but just saying, okay, I think this is this kind of role. So I wanted to kind of go by what the book was saying, but it felt right at the time that Friedman was so shocked that we didn't know what to do. Why didn't Feist do anything during this whole time? Why did you just sit there and laugh and then really just try to escape when things really went wrong? Well, I thought about it for a second, and, once again, her motivation was simply to be safe and to have a safe place to live this hedonistic lifestyle. She is surrounded by 2 Circle Knights. Not just Circle Knights, but they are both wizards. A 2 versus 1 situation is not a good place to be. Yes, she was a powerful wizard in her own right. She could certainly have done a lot of damage, but I decided, based upon how things were going, that her main concern at that moment was to flee the coop, to make sure that she was going to be okay, and to maybe regroup later on. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. Had things gone on over time, What would she have done if she felt that the Circle Knights were a threat? She certainly would have called in the favor from that Lich. But it didn't happen. That's not how the game actually went down. The reactions of both Friedman and Feist to Black Hadric were not good. But we didn't have a lot of time to play them. He said a couple things, and it didn't go very well. The charm roll reflected that anyway. And, there wasn't enough time other than the fact that they really didn't like him. But that didn't matter too much because things kind of went to hell at that particular point. But with those two roles, or two situations, with, Kai Ernst flipping up the eye patch, and then with the actual, casting the spell, I think I would have, going back, I probably would have called for quickness versus 12 rolls. I wasn't quite sure, but I want to make sure that we're rolling dice when we're supposed to roll dice. So that's something, I thought about afterwards. It felt like it was 50-50 at the time. It wasn't 100% clear in the book. But I think, going back and thinking about it, I probably should have gone and had them roll dice. Do I feel bad about it, or the game went a completely different way? No. But that's how I felt at the time. After that, actually Friedman running in terror to the eye, it felt very, very natural. The idea that, oh my God, the compact I've had with this thing probably has been severed because they've just taken out the part of my body that it's replaced. And so he runs there in terror, and now he's running there under the soothe spell, so he's going slower. Kai's able to follow him with ease, and what have you. The group got easily managed by the spell of hate, and then the web spell. The danger, the significant danger of the group of guards was managed not only by the Circle Knights themselves, but by the other wizard who wanted to escape, which was a clash. As Feist saved her own skin, casting a couple spells. But groups are very, very dangerous. And if you don't do something, if the Circle Knights had not gotten away from that situation, they would have died. This game is very, very lethal. It is not superhero-ish. Groups of people are quite lethal. But, anyhow, Friedman's going there in terror, and the combat with the eye went pretty fast. It's a scary creature, but they don't have armor, so they're not the hardest things in the world to kill. That they did a pretty good job of handling things tactically, so that didn't feel bad. I think the eye is more dangerous in terms of things that it can do over time with the actual person that's under the influence of the creature itself. So it felt right, and once again, Friedman was at that point so distraught, so broken as a person, that I didn't feel like him fighting or really even being able to do anything except to declare his innocence. I simply did, what anybody would have done. I did the right thing. I did what I needed to do to save my village. He was so broken at that point, I didn't feel the need to portray him or play him as being that, I didn't see a need for more conflict with the Circle Knights. Just a broken man. And there was no real call or need to call for a roll to have them, Kai cut his head off at that point. It seemed like it felt right at the moment. So that's what I was thinking. The tripwire itself, that was real fun to see whether they would actually go over that or not. And, the tripwire was, if people find out that they were in collusion with this eye, then they would, kill all the gentry and burn the longhouse down. Looking back at it, it's funny because, Hadric didn't say they were in collusion with a demon, but they said there was Black Urbaja interference. At the time, that felt right enough that I decided, yes, that's going to trip the tripwire. Things still went well for Rilke because the other two tripwires didn't get tripped. But it felt right at that moment for the populace to, if the tripwire had been tripped and the populace really took offense to that and, killed the remaining gentry that were still related to Friedman. So that's what I was thinking. It was interesting. It was very freeing. Not that I don't try to play like this anyway, but, having the actual instructions to not tie things together, to not force things, to, kind of keeping that in the back of my mind. Having all this information that was prepared, so I knew what these characters were, I knew what they wanted, I knew in certain cases with the timeline that was associated with the eye and with the Racker, there were things that would happen, had things going on, kept going on. There certainly was a timeline in place with Feist, because if she felt that things were dangerous, she would have called in the favor from the Lich. So there were at least 3 potential timelines going on, and maybe 4, with the idea that our priest Reagan, like, if he really got concerned that maybe this knowledge, or people knew about this artifact, and he had that conflict. Gee, do I want help, or do I want to keep this knowledge safe? Or, all kinds of things could have gone on. But these are things I'd let go of and just simply play how these characters would act in the moment, not try to force all this other information on the players, or force all these other events to happen. But instead, just let things occur naturally. And so what occurred, occurred. And how I played the characters, what I was thinking was, what would these people, based on who they are, do at that moment? So that's what I was thinking. What do you think?